It's the Vintage Modern, guys. It's the one sitting up there behind my shoulder. This amp, I first heard of the Marshall Vintage Modern. I think I saw a Paul Gilbert rig rundown, and I thought if Paul's using these amps, it must be pretty ripping, right? But obviously found out later that he runs them pretty clean and he's getting all his tone from his pedals. So the owner of this Vintage Modern, he just wants it more Marshall-like, right? More classic Marshall. Get more of that vintage bite and grind out of it. He has a decent collection of amps already. He doesn't need another high gain amp. He just wants something that sounds like an old Marshall. And when you look at the schematic for the Vintage Modern, which we will do in this video, you can see it's got the essence of what an old Marshall circuit is and what it can be. So I think we've got the bones here of something that can be improved with some minor tweaks. So let's see where we can take this. So what we're listening to there is the stock amp in the higher gain mode. It adds in a parallel triode, so you can kind of like two gain stages, but they're actually parallel together. So it's just like a hot rodded single gain stage extra. And these amps have a post phase inverter master in them as stock, which works well when you run it in the low mode, because that's like a kind of standard plexi, well, like a plexi, but with a post-phase inverter master. With this extra gain stage in though, that post-phase inverter master, it's a bit mushy. So to improve this thing, we're going to need to lean that out a bit, I think, and get it a bit tighter. I've heard worse, but I've certainly heard better. Alright, this thing's sounding pretty good. So let's go through it, and we will go through the schematic as well, right? So kind of what I'll talk about here is more about how to implement it. Now, the Vintage Modern's pretty easy to work on. What you're looking at here is actually the finished mod, but this main board is all you need to work on for this particular mod. Again, this is not a high gain mod. This is just really, well, I mean, there's plenty of gain, don't worry about that, but this is more about, you know, improving what's already here rather than kind of like really mod this to become something very different. So this main board comes out, and you can just pull it straight out of the amp and flip it over and work on it underneath to safely remove the resistors and caps that need to come out. I did make some fine tuning once I I roughed in the main changes. I reassembled the amp and then obviously just finished it by ear. So I did change a couple of things, like this resistor here from the top of the board, which you can do, but if you're going to follow this mod, you can do it without having to just come in over the top. You can solder everything from underneath and keep it really tidy. The way you remove this board is you just pull these knobs off, you unscrew all of the pot shafts and the input jack. There's 2 screws here. Don't forget to remove the preamp tubes and just pull them out. And then you just got to pull these, these clip-on connectors away. Take some photos before you do it. It's always a good idea. And these 3 connectors here, and then the board will just lift off. Really easy, actually. Let's talk about voltages. This is the power transformer here. It's 400 center tap 400. It's really high. The voltages in this thing, this is originally spec as a KT66 powered amp, and I'm measuring the plate voltage in this amp is 535 volts. It's super high. And looking at this power transformer, how it's spec'd, it's what you'd expect to get, right? It's 400 center tap 400. So the voltages are bloody high. This amp actually has EL34s in it, which we'll obviously put in post-factory. And I would suggest that that's at the upper limit of what they are comfortable with. Sounds alright though. So I mentioned the voltages because these are the B plus drop-in resistors along here, and this one here, normally a 10k, I've moved it to a 22k, and now the voltage supply for the phase inverter is more in the ballpark of what I would want for a vintage Marshall kind of spec. It's still a bit high, but more comfortable than what it was with the 10k. So, I won't go through all of these changes because we'll do it in the schematic. But you can see the 1 watt resistors that I've put in, because that's all I stock is 1 watt. I don't have any half watts. Guys, it's a pretty straightforward mod, and definitely improves the SAM. Alright guys, we're going to go through the schematic for the vintage mod, and I'm going to mark up in real time using my iPad the changes that I made to the amp. Okay, this is the stock 2466 preamp. You can find this file on the internet. It's the same whether it's the 50 watt or the 100 watt, the preamp here. So I'm just going to zoom in on this. So we want to make this like a Marshall, and you can see what we have here is like we've got this detail volume here and this body volume. So that's like the detail is like the treble channel on the plexi, and the body is like the normal channel. It's the way to think of it, right? So if I want to make this like a plexi, then let's make it like a plexi, right? So all I did for this mod was to set these values to be the same as if, you're running a 9059 super lead, right? So I want these grid stoppers to be 33k. I don't want that as a 1k5. I want that as a 2k7. Okay. And I don't want that as a 220 nanofarad. I want that as a 0.68 microfarad. You see this in 100 Marshalls. 2k7 with a 0.68 bypass on the cathode. 100k plate resistor, R3. This guy here. We're happy with that. No problem. Okay. Now, this coupler here, C2, 1 nanofarad. We don't want that. So I like 0.0022 microfarad here, which is 2.2 nanofarad. Okay, so we made that change. I left the normal channel, so R6 and C4 down the bottom here. I left those as is because I don't really use a normal channel on a plexi, so I wasn't too worried about it. Let's move along. Okay, so what we have here, C5 and R10, and this arrangement here with R8 and R9. These are the, what I'd call the mixer resistors on a plexi, which is where your treble channel and your normal channel come together. And this is pretty close to what it should be. But for C5, I made that a 470 picofarad, which is as it should be. And the one big missing thing that's not on the volume pot for the treble channel, the detailed channel here, is a bright cap. So I put that in and I soldered it on the underneath of the board. I will show that in the pictures of the mod. And this is a 4700 picofarad bright cap, which is the big one, the good one. This mid boost thing down here, yeah, look, I won't go into trying to explain what's going on, but you can see if you add the 220s together, R8 and R9, 220 plus 220, you basically got your 470, close to. I just removed C7 so that when the mid booster is turned on, we actually have a stock plexi. Because when that mid booster is switched off, this 10 nanofarad cap here comes into play and is bleeding a lot of your signal down to ground. Okay, so with this configuration in the preamp, you've basically got a 1959 super lead. Pretty close, yeah? And lo and behold, it sounds like one when you're in the low gain mode of this amp. The only other thing I did is to add a fat cap here on R17. Okay, and I used a 22 microfarad there, just in parallel over the top of C17. Now, let's talk about the dynamic mode or the hot mode or the, the lead mode, whatever you want to call it. This brings in V2, this guy here, and V2 is, if you look closely at this, you'll see that there's two triodes, right, in V2. There's V2A and V2B, and they share R11, which is the plate load resistor, or the plate resistor. So this is a parallel gain stage, okay? And what happens in a parallel gain stage is you have twice the current. So if you want to have the same amount of gain as a 100K cathode on a regular triode, look at R16 here, right? 100K plate load on a single triode, V3A. This is, you see this stuff all day long in a Marshall. Well, because this is a parallel stage here in V2 and we've still got 100K here, it's kind of like having 200K in a single triode. So I reduced this because I didn't want too much gain coming from this stage, because this is a post-phase inverter master volume on this amp, and I left that as it is because I want the customer to be able to use it. Well, he wants to be able to use it kind of like a plexi and have this dynamic mode or hot mode as just a bit of an icing on the cake, so to speak. So I moved that to 68K, and then coming down to the cathode, down here on C9 and R13, played with this a little bit. I wanted this to be a bit more like a 2203, where you have like a cold clipper or a 10K style cathode. So we have 4K7 here, and I removed that bypass cap. You can keep that in 1 microfarad there, but you'll get a lot of gain from this stage as a result of that. And that might be to your taste, but I found it a bit too mushy. I left the 1 nanofarad here on C8, treble, I can't really think what you call it, plate snubber. That's it. C8, the plate snubber. I left that in there because I'm trying to keep the top end at this point in the circuit kind of under control, and that is a pretty handy way of doing it, so I just left it there. I kept the 1 nanofarad here on C11, keep it pretty tight, and again, there was kind of still too much top end in the stage, kind of making the amp pretty bright. And because I've kind of, I've got my big bright cap here, and I've made this, like a really aggressive super lead plexi, I don't want too much more top end coming from the stage. I really want it just to punch through the mids. So C72, I made that, moved it up from 220 picofarad to 470 picofarad, and that will roll more top end off. And R15 I set to 220k. I played with this value quite a bit. This is the voltage divided with R14. Yeah, R14 here, R15. And the lower you make R15 in terms of value, the more you're bleeding signal to ground, and you'll be able to wash off some gain coming out of the stage. So again, this is a value here you can play with depending on how much gain you want from the stage. Well, the brief was to improve this vintage mod and retain the kind of the guts of the amp, just make it sounding more classic. I think we achieved that. It sounds more like a vintage circuit, not surprisingly, because we took it back to standard vintage values. Hopefully you found this video useful. Maybe you can apply some of these mods to your own vintage mod, and if you've been looking to get some kind of more vintage tones out of it. And I will catch you on the next video.